Argentina is no stranger to crisis. The South American country survived a brutal U.S.-backed military coup in the late 70s of last century and recently has faced recurring economic difficulties that have plunged the country into debt. Today, Argentina faces yet another challenge, the COVID-19 pandemic. Unfortunately, because the pandemic was first detected in China, resentment towards China and the Chinese people seems to be growing in that country. We've already seen bigoted rhetoric from high-level Western government officials and tragic increase of anti-Chinese violence. To help counter this dangerous sentiment, tonight's guest, the former Argentinian ambassador to China, wrote an open letter on Monday advising the world to, quote, not blame China, but thank it for launching a health campaign unprecedented in the history of humanity. To discuss his letter and beyond and the crisis in Latin America, I'm pleased to be joined via Skype by Ambassador Guelar, former Argentinian ambassador to China. Mr. Ambassador, welcome back, I should say, to the point, and thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
No, thank you to you. It's a pleasure to be in touch with you and your audience.
Thank you. Now, as we said on Thursday, the head of the World Health Organization urged an end to what he called the politicization of the virus. Although his comments were directed more towards the Trump administration, we have seen anti-China rhetoric expressed in other places as well, even crimes committed. What prompted you to write that article? What is the main thrust of your argument?
Well, I feel that in all the Western world, including Argentina, it seems that there is a strong anti-China feeling and blaming China because of the existence of this virus. In my open letter, I'm speaking that the virus can begin in any country in the world. The Spanish fever began in the United States. The black pest began in Europe, in this case, and China accepts that the origin of the mutation of this virus happened in Wuhan originally, but this can happen in any place in the world. And on the contrary, and I am pointing out the effort that China did and is doing to fight against the virus, and that is helping to control the pandemic. That means, in my personal point of view, we have to thank China for the effort that China is doing, contributing to control a pandemic. That means that is something that all the countries has to do. Unfortunately, cases like the United States or Spain or Italy, they were too slow to react to the pandemic, and the cost is very high in this moment. Luckily, in the case of Argentina, we decided, our president decided to this quarantine, this lockdown very early, and the results are very positive.
Do you see this as a sudden change, a sudden surge of anti-China feeling, or has it been building on for a while over the past several years, if not decades, in terms of the domestic perception in Argentina, in Latin America, of China and the Chinese people?
Well, I think that there is a ambivalent, a dual feeling. In one hand, it's extraordinary admiration for the achievements of China during the last, especially during the last 40 years, and that is very well recognized in the world. And at the same time, the impact of the confrontation, what we call the commercial war, during the last 2 years, have increased a lot of I think, the wrong perceptions of China. And we have to work very hard on that, because there is no doubt that culturally we have differences. But one thing is to understand the difference, and the other thing is to blame China or to consider China an enemy. That, of course, is something that China and all the friends that China has all over the world has to work out a lot.
In your letter, you said that the Western world was slow to react. You also said just now, you also mentioned that if we had all acted in unison, we would already be facing the end of the pandemic as it is in China today, and not starting the process that will consume so many human and material resources. Can you elaborate a bit more on that? What do you mean by acted in unison, and how do you look at the reality on the ground, which is quite the opposite of an action in unison, basically a lack of solidarity we're seeing?
Yes, what I think is China has been very cooperative with the world, including in Argentina. You send some sanitary equipment, you donate sanitary equipment, not only to Argentina, to Italy, to Spain, to the United States. But in a way, this fear with a pandemic awakes the worst feelings. The people it's in panic in a way. Of course, the borders are closed. There's no planes intercommunicating people. We have thousands of Argentinians that can't return to Argentina because the flights have stopped. Then this going back to the worst nationalist feelings is produced by fear and by the pandemic. And the world has to work against that. We have to coordinate the effort. We have to work together. We have to share technologies and how to find a vaccine to finally finish with this pandemic. But the first impulse in the world is everyone has to save themselves by themselves. This is it's human nature, it's a human condition to react in that way. But I think that this is a common problem. It's a worldwide problem. And there's no doubt that the results of the Chinese way to fight the pandemic is being successful. I insist we have to work together and not to have these feelings blaming China as the origin of the pandemic. Then we have friends and enemies. That's a very wrong approach.
Well, you were talking about the Chinese way of dealing with the pandemic being successful. There have actually been experts who suggested that the West institute the kind of lockdown seen in China, and if they had done that, they argue that the virus would have been better contained. From your years of experience of living in China, working with the Chinese people, what do you think can be shared by the outside world from China's decisive action that prevented the outcome from being worse?
Well, I think that from the first day of January, the idea of the immediate lockdown, especially concentrated in the first stage in Hubei province and Wuhan, but finally all the restrictions extended to all the Chinese territory, were very effective. Unfortunately, in the Western world, not only in Argentina, look, United States or Europe, they were during January and February looking at all the things that China was doing, and that was in all media, in all networks, every day explaining how China was fighting against the pandemic, but there was no reaction. I think that we have to blame on us, that we were slow to react, and that's the reason why, unfortunately, Italians and Spanish and the Americans nowadays are suffering a lot because they thought that this was something that was happening in China, that it was not too serious, that the traditional influenza was worse than the COVID-19. And that was very wrong. That we have to blame on us our mistakes, because we had more time than China to react. We have the example and the experience of China to use in our favor, and instead of that, during January and February, nothing was done. And I think that that has to be included in the analysis.
However, in your country, Argentina, actually the authorities were some of the first to institute more tougher, let's say, lockdown in South America, including mandatory quarantines in the capital, Buenos Aires. These actions are quite contrary to the behavior of some other countries in the region. Could you help us understand what has been the progress of quarantine measures in your country and how the picture looks like now going forward?
Well, the early quarantine was a major success in Argentina. It was a great decision of our president. Nowadays, we are having, unfortunately, of course, around 65 people dead and around 1,800 cases in Argentina. That's far less than Mexico or Brazil or look, the United States. That means it's very clear that the early quarantine, the lockdown, was the right approach. You did it in China. It worked without any doubt. And it's a national lockdown. It's not only in Buenos Aires city. It's a national lockdown in all our 24 provinces. And really, I think that we have to persist. Probably it's going to be extended for another 15 days. Formally, it was going to finish the quarantine next Monday. The decision of the president was to extend for 2 weeks more. Really the acceptance from the people, even though the recession and our economic problems make it very difficult to enforce the quarantine, the calculation is around 85% of the people, that's too high as a percentage, is following strictly the quarantine with a great consensus. That means this is extraordinary percentage if you consider that around 30%, 35% of the people of Argentina lack a reasonable housing. Then to have a domestic quarantine, you have to have a house. That means that the effort that our community is doing is extraordinary. But the majority of the people agree with this approach, and I think that we have to persist.
Okay, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Ambassador Diego Guelar, former Argentinian ambassador to China. By the way, on the question of the exact origin of the virus, the epidemic was believed to come out to have originated in Wuhan, but scientifically there is no conclusion yet exactly where the virus originated, so we have to make that clear. We hope one day, scientists will unveil the final answer wherever it might have been. Let's not demonize or stigmatize anybody. As you said, epidemics can happen anywhere. Thank you so much, Ambassador. Please take care, please be safe, and I look forward to having you back on the show sometime in the future. And
thank you, and I hope to have the chance to celebrate the end of this pandemic in Beijing.
Absolutely, we look forward to that day. Thank you.